346 people died in two crashes of the same airplane model, 5 months apart on opposite sides of the world. The company that built it admitted in a signed legal document that it had deceived the regulators who approved that plane to carry passengers in the first place. As of 2026, that company has never been convicted of anything. By the end of this video, you'll understand exactly how a guilty plea, already agreed to in writing by the company's own CEO, quietly turned into no criminal conviction at all. The plane was the Boeing 737 MAX, one of the best-selling commercial aircraft in the world, flown by airlines everywhere from budget carriers to major national flag carriers. Lion Air Flight 61 crashed off the coast of Indonesia in October 2018, killing everyone on board. Ethiopian Airlines Flight 302 crashed less than 5 months later in March 2019, killing everyone on that flight too. Investigators traced both crashes to a flight control system called MCAS, designed to automatically push the plane's nose down under certain conditions using data from a single sensor, a system pilots were never properly trained on, because Boeing had convinced regulators it barely needed mentioning in pilot manuals at all, let alone requiring expensive simulator retraining that might have made the plane less attractive to airlines shopping for a cheaper alternative to a full new aircraft design. In January 2021, the Justice Department charged Boeing with conspiracy to defraud the United States, accusing the company of deceiving the FAA about that exact system during the plane's certification process, a certification that allowed airlines around the world to legally start flying it. Boeing avoided an immediate criminal conviction through what's called a deferred prosecution agreement, pay a $243.6 million fine, admit in writing to deceiving the FAA, and fix the company's internal safety culture over the following 3 years. If Boeing genuinely held up its end, the charge would eventually disappear entirely, as though it had never been filed at all. Then, on 2024, a door plug blew out of a 737 MAX 9 mid-flight, reopening the entire case. That May, the Justice Department found Boeing had violated its 2021 agreement. By July, Boeing agreed to plead guilty outright. A $487.2 million fine, an independent monitor, and formal status as a convicted felon. The judge overseeing the case called it the deadliest corporate crime in U.S. history and rejected that plea deal anyway over how the monitor would be chosen. A trial was actually scheduled for June 2025. January 5th, could still buy your way out of accountability, never fully recovered. The reversal drew criticism well beyond the victim's own lawyers too. Senator Richard Blumenthal, among other members of Congress, publicly condemned the new arrangement, arguing that letting Boeing avoid a felony conviction after admitting to conduct connected to hundreds of deaths sent a uniquely damaging signal about corporate accountability. Judge O'Connor still had to sign off on dismissing the case entirely, and he did so with open, documented reluctance. In his written order, he stated plainly that the deal fails to secure the necessary accountability to ensure the safety of the flying public, and he dismissed the government's stated justification for avoiding trial. The idea that going forward carried real uncertainty and risk, calling that reasoning unconvincing on its face, pointedly noting prosecutors already had a signed confession from Boeing's own CEO and chief legal officer, admitting to every element of the charge. He dismissed the case anyway, ruling he had no legal authority to reject the government's own decision once it chose not to prosecute a case it had every right to walk away from. Victims' families appealed that dismissal. In March 2026, a federal appeals court upheld it, ruling that a crime victims law doesn't give families an unlimited right to override a prosecutor's own decision not to pursue a case, no matter how it was reached. To be fair to how the system actually works, prosecutors hold wide, largely unreviewable discretion over which cases to bring, and which to abandon. And that discretion exists for legitimate reasons, including cases where a lengthy, expensive trial carries real risk of an unpredictable jury outcome, regardless of how strong the evidence looks on paper at the highest levels of government. This isn't unique to Boeing either. Deferred and non-prosecution agreements have become the default tool for resolving corporate criminal cases generally, precisely because governments have historically worried that a full felony conviction against a company that size could threaten jobs, contracts, and even national security interests that have nothing to do with the individuals actually responsible for the wrongdoing. Whether that same logic should apply to a case explicitly tied to hundreds of deaths rather than a purely financial crime is exactly the question victims' family outside observers. Boeing has also continued paying throughout this entire saga. Hundreds of millions of dollars across individual wrongful death settlements with families on top of every fine already mentioned here, and it says it's still spending on the compliance and safety investments it originally committed to under the earlier since abandoned deal. None of that required a courtroom conviction to actually happen. But walk through the actual sequence once more, slowly, because it's easy to lose the thread in all the legal terminology. A company signs a legal document admitting it deceived the government during a safety certification process that put passengers on planes. It later violates the agreement that came with that admission, an admission still on the public record today. It agrees, formally and in writing, to plead guilty to a felony. A judge who personally calls the underlying conduct the deadliest corporate crime in American history still has to let the whole thing dissolve into a payment and a promise, because the decision not to prosecute belonged to the government alone, not to him and not to the families who had spent years insisting on exactly the guilty plea Boeing had already signed its name to. We say never got a real public answer. Somewhere in the middle of all of it, a man who spent 32 years trying to get the company to fix what he saw on the factory floor didn't live to see how any of it ended.